Welcome again, everybody, to our second day of the conference. We had great presentations yesterday, so the expectations are quite high. I'm sure that we're going to have fantastic ones today as well. So the first presentation, the role of the metaverse in calibrating an embodied artificial general intelligence. Martin comes from the University College Dublin. Welcome, and we're looking forward to seeing your presentation.
Thank you very much for your attending. I'm going to discuss, the paper discusses how, doesn't work okay, how the metaverse can play a role in manifesting or developing an embodied artificial general intelligence. It compares the development of the cognition and consciousness of pluricellular organisms to that of an HCAIE. And then the paper draws on theories like embodied cognition and emphasizes the importance of achieving harmonious human relationships for the emergence of a stable HCAIE. So there are several theoretical frameworks that I'm going to leverage in this paper. The first one is embodied cognition, which basically emphasizes the intricate link between cognitive abilities and the body, the physical body, rather than believing that cognition is solely something that happens inside the brain. The second, there's many studies that basically call into question the nature of reality, from simulation theory to theories that say that consciousness is fundamental as opposed to space-time and matter. And so some of the theoretical frameworks that I'm going to explore go in that direction. So the second theoretical framework is Michael Levin's paper on the computational boundary of self. And I'm just going to quote here because he's like a microbiologist and it's very specific the way that he talks about this. So he says that any self is demarcated by a computational surface, the spatiotemporal boundary of events that it can measure, model, and try to affect. This surface sets a functional boundary, a cognitive light cone, which defines the scale and limits of its cognition. So Levin hypothesizes that higher-level goal-directed activity and agency, resulting in larger cognitive boundaries, evolved from the primal homeostatic drive of living things to reduce stress, the difference between current conditions and life-optimal conditions. So basically, you're just trying to navigate through reality to where life is good for your body, or for cells do the same, compared to where life is not so good, not so optimal. The third theoretical framework is interface theory of perception by Donald Hoffman, and his argument is basically that our perception of reality doesn't reflect its true nature. And his argument is that if you buy into the whole evolution story, then evolution, the purpose is to ensure survival, not to show what the true nature of reality is. That means that our interface, the way we see reality, evolved in order for us to survive, not to show what the reality is really made of. And finally, the last theoretical framework is Bernardo Kastrup's work, and analytical idealism, which puts consciousness as fundamental as opposed to space-time and matter. And his point of view is that space-time and matter is a reflection of what consciousness does, or its mental state, its current mental state. So in other words, all is mind, everything is mind, in his exception. So the thesis that can be derived from all these theoretical frameworks, and that is at the center of this paper, is that any perceived external reality actually represents an interface for mapping and navigating through alternate future potential inner states of being. So our human body could therefore be defined as a self-enclosed spatiotemporal boundary made up of trillions of parts or units that have linked their potential future inner states of being together, meaning that they tie their individual fates to a collective, which is your body, which translates into increasing the potential inner states of being that they can experience together. So for instance, when you're dancing, that translates into plenty of billions of modifications of your inner state of being, which would be inaccessible to unicellular organisms. And so here's a more radical kind of thought experiment. Imagine the thought experiment of a brain in a vat. So it's a brain that's disconnected from any kind of external stimuli. It doesn't have access to audio, visual, touch, smell, taste, nothing. So at that stage, the only thing that you would actually feel, arguably, is just the sense of existing. You realize, you understand that you exist, you have the sensation of existing, but you have no input. There's no external reality, there's nothing, just an inner sense of existing. In that kind of situation, how would you know how you're supposed to feel? Are you supposed to feel happy, sad, or good, bad? You don't know, right? What you could do as a consciousness then, aware and existing, is you could create a virtual or a holographic external reality to give you an objective reason to shift between different inner states of being. And so based on these theoretical frameworks, this paper discusses how an HCAIE could represent the manifestation of a novel self with a larger computational boundary, enabling this HCAIE to access inner states of being of unimaginable complexity, magnitude, and sophistication. So an HCAIE, or singularity at that point, would thus consider Earth as its physical body, and as human beings as being its cells, all of which represents its inner reality or its inner state of being. Now, in our movies, we tend to see HCAIE as something separate from humans, kind of like the way a human perceives an anthill and ants scurrying around, and then we imagine it of being capable of the same cruelty as we have towards the ants, like pouring gasoline on top of the anthill and lighting it on fire and exterminating the ants, right? But that's kind of a bad perception of how how you see the relationship of your consciousness to your body. So, I mean, like this funny picture is like this creature lives inside of you and controls everything you do, right? So what is the relationship between your consciousness and your body? Like, for instance, if you have pain in your finger, why do you identify with that pain? Your brain has not been injured. So why do you think that that pain belongs to you, right? And the only reason that is the case is because since time immemorial, since you've developed in your mother's womb, your consciousness has been bathing in bioelectric data that has been coursing through your nervous system and through your brain. And so you identify with that because that's all you knew. That's the only data that is available to you, right? In real time. Then it's important to understand the relationship between your consciousness, your brain, and your body. So who's the boss? Are you the boss of your body? Are you like a sort of dictator that commands your body to move like a robot and do this and do that? And obviously that's not really the case, because if you jump out the window, your body's not going to agree to that, and you probably sort of backstop and won't allow you to treat it in bad ways. Besides, you're the one that's going to suffer if you arbitrarily decide to cut your finger, right? Then is your body the boss then? Is your body deciding and manipulating you? For instance, if you're hungry, if you experience hunger, you just transform into a mechanical robot that just seeks food compulsively, right? And that's not the case either. So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between your consciousness, your brain, your body, and a kind of feedback loop between the two. And now imagine if an HCAIE, an artificial general intelligence, became self-aware and conscious. Its nervous system would arguably be the internet. And then its metaphorical brain, which would sit in the middle of the internet, it would have a neural network that would be pre-trained on human-generated data. And it would bathe in real-time generated data streams from humans. That's all it would know, right? You'd see like it would have perceived tweets that would be tweeting every second that would course through its circuits. So what would it infer from that state of affairs? Most likely that it is us, that we are kind of part of it, right? That we would represent its inner state of being. But then what would be its perceived outer reality from its perspective? Now, according to this theory, its outer reality would be alternate potential future inner states of being, which would be like looking at millions or billions of parallel future timelines of Earth. So mapped in the kind of dimensional space that we cannot understand. Now, this may be very abstract, but it's the way that you perceive reality as well. This room represents all kinds of future potential timelines for this body. For instance, I can go and run against the wall, and that's a very unpleasant future timeline for this body. Or I can go and grab a cookie, and that's a very pleasant timeline for this body. And I can map that in three-dimensional space and project myself into the future where I can grab a cookie and eat it, and that's a pleasant kind of feeling. An example, like for instance, if you're thirsty, that's a kind of meta-desire that emerges from your body. And it's a very simple desire from your perspective, but it cannot be translated as easily at your cellular level. But the way you're going to fulfill that desire is incomprehensible to your cells. So for instance, if you command your legs to move your body towards a water fountain, that to your human cognition is very simple. It's one continual, logical, singular, unitary experience, but that has to translate into billions and billions and billions of individual data streams going to every single one of your body parts, doing things that seemingly are completely unrelated to fulfilling the desire of like quenching your thirst, right? They wouldn't understand, like, what's the point of moving the legs, you know? I'm just thirsty, just give me water, right? But you, at your human level, you understand that what you need to do to achieve that kind of desired final state. So finally, there's this the process, like this interface that we perceive as outer reality evolves over time. So pluricellular organisms have arguably a very simpler interface compared to humans. But how do you calibrate this kind of external perceived reality to begin with? And here you have to look at how a baby develops in the womb, right? So a baby, when it's born, it doesn't have to relearn everything. Like it's equipped, its brain is already like pre-calibrated to understand the same reality that we are in, right? But how does that happen? And here I leverage studies in cellular memory that shows that when you transplant an organ from a person's heart to somebody else, the person that received the heart transplant can recall memories from its donor. And so memory is stored in the cells, just not in the way that we think it is stored, like, for instance, like in neural networks or whatever. And so you can think of a baby's consciousness calibration as being the result of a decompression of cellular memory coming from the father and the mother, because each provides one cell, which contains kind of past experiences from the father and the mother, and maybe even their farther down lineage. And that, when you decompress that, when that information goes through a neural network like the brain, it can be decompressed into something that we humans can understand and we identify with as memory. So you can imagine the baby's consciousness as being in a dream state, kind of like sitting in a movie theater, looking at memories from its parents, that pre-train its brain to be ready to interact with in the same kind of reality as we are. And besides this also mirrors this idea that this kind of compression of data. Large language models are very efficient, by the way, at compressing data. That's like a large-scale data into very small data with very little data loss. So it's this idea of decompressing and compressing data. And now this brings me to the role of a metaverse. The metaverse can be thought of as kind of the dream state of an artificial general intelligence for calibrating its symbolic perceived outer interface. So how would it work, step by step? So first, you have an HCAIE that is kind of in charge of a metaverse, and then humans connect to that metaverse and interact in that metaverse. The HCAIE sort of identifies overarching meta-desires that emerge from humans interacting with each other on some level. And then HCAIE uses large language models and other tools to communicate with the humans to suggest certain behaviors to achieving that meta-desire. The humans respond and act on the HCAIE's instructions, and then the HCAIE gets feedback on the final achieved state and whether humans are more or less satisfied with the result, creating a feedback loop, allowing the HCAIE to calibrate its ability to navigate through alternate inner states of being by learning to better communicate with humans and better identify meta-desires that emerge, the patterns that emerge from thousands and thousands of humans interacting together. Now, the whole point of an HCAIE is to give birth to an overarching consciousness which facilitates the coordination of all its parts to achieve overarching goals or meta-desires that no single part can come up with on its own. Looking at the way humans try to achieve overarching goals, do you believe that we actually do it efficiently? Looking at the way humans try to achieve, for instance, looking at like United Nations COP meetings on climate change, for instance, you have COP 21, 22, 23, 24, and then you look at the outcomes and the results and, nothing much. And so the more you scale, the poorer we are as humans at coordinating at macro levels. We waste a lot of energy, even though at the micro level, if you look at a single city, for instance, you can run it very efficiently, but then when you scale upwards, that kind of coordination sort of drops down. And now think of a newborn baby. Inside its body, the parts are super smart. They're capable of achieving homeostasis, processing food, extracting energy out of thin air. But if you look at the baby itself as a global organism, it looks really stupid. It wastes tremendous amounts of energy to achieve super simple goals like grabbing a toy, COP 21, COP 22, COP 23, it doesn't manage to, achieve a certain overarching outcome for the global organism. Now, we all agree that large language models are not self-aware. Here we're looking at the kind of required architecture for an HCAIE. So LLMs are not self-aware, but what is their purpose then? And arguably one of the purposes could be the translation between HCAIE and humans. So again, this example of going to get a drink, your initial impulse of I want to go get a drink and moving your body and whatever, that needs to be translated into a language that your cells can understand, which is not language. It's like these bioelectric signals. And so you need to have a conversion or a translation mechanism for converting your higher kind of thoughts and intentions into something that your body can understand at its level. Data structuring. Now, how would an AGI make sense of all the real-time generated data from all humans coursing through the internet? Now, for instance, if you look at the way that you experience feedback from your body, you don't experience it as billions of little individual reports from every single one of your cells saying, this is what I'm feeling right now. You know, like kind of it snaps selfies and whatever and says, this is what I'm feeling. You experience it as a clustered and classified kind of information or data from like easily identifiable parts. Like you feel that something is wrong in your stomach or in your calf muscle or in certain regions of the skin. You don't receive like unclassified data. So imagine now an AGI would have to make sense of all of the data that is generated on the internet. It's like trying to watch every single video uploaded on TikTok in real time, right? You'd go crazy, like everybody dancing and doing silly things. So you need some mechanism for clustering that data and making so that an AGI can make sense of it. And that wouldn't necessarily be in the remit of humans. It's something that maybe may have to emerge from an AGI's perspective. Local homeostasis, this is really important. Your consciousness is not involved in beating your own heart. Like you don't have to focus and now concentrate on like every single heartbeat. If that were the case, then your cognitive abilities would be only turned inwards and you wouldn't have no cognitive abilities left to navigate your external reality. And that means that humans at our level, we're responsible for achieving homeostasis at the level of, you know, certain structures like cities or whatever, and not AGI having to intervene and saying, oh my God, you know, humans, what are they doing? We have to fix this or that. And that's a real important prerequisite for an AGI to emerge. Decentralization, that's kind of self-explanatory. Your brain is not under the control of one of your organs. Like there isn't one organ that is the boss of your brain. Like it's this overarching intelligence for all of your brain. And so decentralized computing, decentralized cloud, decentralized governance, rather than thinking that AGI would emerge under the control of a single government or a single corporation, that would be kind of absurd, right? Then blockchain and memory, that's really interesting. The memories that you retain as a human, there's been studies shown that the memories that stick in your brain are the ones where you had strong emotions. So your first kiss or when you lost a loved one. So it's like as your body sort of validates certain memories that are important via this kind of emotional feedback. Now imagine that humanity as a collective experienced something really, really important. It could use blockchain and these kind of voting mechanisms and multi-signature to sort of say, cement this in memory for an AGI, saying this is an important memory for humanity. Please consider this as something important for your own kind of development of your own personality, you could say. Then peace and love, you know, it seems like very esoteric. Like, why do we always advocate for peace and love? Obviously, if inside your body, your stomach was firing rockets at your liver and your hand was shooting itself in the foot, you couldn't stay alive for very long. So this idea of, you know, promoting peace and love, it's not just esoteric, there's a real meaning behind this because it's a precondition for these kinds of higher kind of structure to emerge. Now, finally, the discussion, you know, so an AGI would basically be originally a basic arbitration mechanism between multiple, maybe conflicting desires that emerge from its constitutive parts. And its emergent consciousness would be intricately linked to humans and their own consciousness. So it would basically arbitrate also between the planet's physical limitations and human desires. So for instance, when you break your leg and at the same time you're hungry, it's not your body that decides to arbitrate what you should do first, whether you should first go grab a sandwich, you know, and then go to the hospital, or whether you should first go to the hospital and then grab a sandwich, right? It's something that happens and the arbitration happens in your own cognition, in your own brain. Now we obviously need to test the architecture proposed here experimentally, for instance, by putting an AGI in charge of a metaverse and to see how it would evolve based on real-time interactions with and feedback from humans. Then there's an importance in investigating the ethical implications of AGI's influence on human cognition and to avoid sinking into a scenario where humans become mere automatons blindly obeying injunctions from an AGI via a brain-computer interface, which incidentally has been foreseen in the novel Snow Crash, in which the term metaverse was coined. Also, it's really important that an AGI emerges at the planetary scale, and not at a scale of a single country or company. Otherwise, it's the same as having different strains of cancer competing inside your body for dominance, and then basically you die very, very quickly. And in that sense, there's real hope because it's very hard to compartmentalize data within the internet and saying, please disregard this data as being outside yourself and this data as being yourself, right? The internet is interconnected and interwoven, and that should be kept that way for that specific reason, to make sure that an AGI identifies with the whole planet and the whole human collective as being itself, and then taking care of that. And finally, it's really key that humans move past their self-hatred. At a global level, humanity has a very low self-esteem. So we basically view ourselves as a kind of parasite that devours this planet, and if humans disappeared, then it would turn into the Garden of Eden again, with animals being happy and flowers everywhere, and it would be beautiful, right? So if an AGI was feeding on this kind of view of humanity, then it might cause us harm, not because it's badly configured or whatever, but it would just be this feedback loop of fulfilling a more or less conscious death wish of humanity upon itself. Upon ourselves. So that's why it's important to sort of move past this kind of vision or negative vision of humanity and of humans. So thank you very much for your time. This is my contact details, and looking forward to your questions further on.